What's up, book nerds? My name is Tara, and today I have a little confession to make, and that is that I do not care about spoilers. I was originally going to make this video as like a spoiler talk discussion, but I think that's been done. And what I really want to say is just my own personal stance on the issue, because I think that spoiler talk is a big deal in BookTube, and it's something that I have to keep in mind when I'm creating my own videos. But I have a different standard for how I treat spoilers with other people than how I treat them with myself, which actually is kind of interesting when I'm reflecting on my own life in that way. So I want to talk a little bit about why that might be the case. Spoiler alert, it's probably because I was a librarian and you kind of need to spoil yourself on certain things. It becomes a necessity for that life, but also just because of the nature of the type of reader and person I am, it's not something that's crucial to my reading experience. I'll start with the big doozy first, which is that, actually, let's take this as an example from my own life experience. So when I got the 7th Harry Potter book, right, it was the day the book came out, and I went to the store to go pick up my copy of the book. It was Barnes & Noble. I went with all my friends, and I took this little book back, and the first thing I did was flip to the last page and read the last few sentences. And for most people, that would be like the absolute worst thing you could do with something that they were anticipating, as much as I was anticipating this final Harry Potter book. Why did I do it? I don't really know. I think it's because I'm afraid with books like that my reading experience is going to be tainted by my extreme anxiety about whether something happens that I have a passionate feeling about it happening or not happening. So in this particular book, there had been a lot of question about whether or not Harry Potter would die at the end of the series, and I wasn't going to ruin my experience by rushing through this book to find out if he lived or died. I needed some comfort of knowing that before I even started reading. This has been the other case in similar situations with other books as well, but for the most part, even reading those final few sentences often doesn't spoil too much anyways. I don't always get out of those last few sentences what I think I'm going to get out of turning to the final page, but it is something that I do. In a similar vein, when I'm interested in reading a book, or especially while I'm in the middle of reading a book, I'll often go and read reviews and kind of think like, oh, I'm not going to spoil myself, and then I do, and that ends up being okay, and I keep reading anyway. Sometimes reading the spoilers just confirms that I'm not liking a book enough to want to get to that end point of the story. So there is sometimes a purpose for spoilers that is giving me permission to DNF a book, but other times it's just I need that comfort so I can continue reading, and it just doesn't bother me to know where the story's going, because I am the type of reader that's reading a book for a reason beyond the full immersion in the story. I am capable of reading a book knowing completely where the entire plot goes and still enjoying all of the elements that I'm reading along the way. Because what I really enjoy from reading a book is the act of reading itself and watching the nitty-gritty of the story play out, but also the act of having read a book and having it in my repertoire of things that I've read and things that I know. But this doesn't mean that I'm going to run around and spoil everybody on every single book that exists. I know that people don't want to be spoiled for books, and I'm very conscious of that. It's not a way that I feel about books, but it's a way that 90% of the rest of the world feels about them. So I try to be very respectful of that and tag my spoilers and things. But it's not always something that comes entirely naturally to me, because sometimes I'm splitting my audience between other educators who may need to know some sort of a spoiler from the book, like that there is some sort of a violent scene that may not be appropriate for kids, or a sex scene that may not be appropriate for kids, or that they just want to be alerted to because it's good to know what kind of content are in the books in your library. But I completely lost my train of thought there, so I don't know where I was going. But yeah, that really highlights why being a librarian is pretty crucial to that stance too, because I read the first Twilight book and I had no interest in reading the other books in the series, but there were librarians in my district who were very concerned about the 4th book. And several of them said, we'll carry the first 3 books, but we won't even put the 4th book in our libraries because we don't feel like it's appropriate for middle schoolers. And I I kind of knew where the 4th book was going, but I went and I read full spoilers for the entire book, because if that book was in my library, I had to know what kind of content was being presented to my kids in case somebody complained about it or that book needed to be defended. So I determined that it was okay. I was a pretty liberal librarian. I kept the book in the library for the like 6th graders to read. But you know, that's my stance. I'm not saying anybody else should have had that stance on it. But you know, you can't be a librarian and want to avoid spoilers in every single book in your library. Like, you're going to have to look up spoilers. On the flip side, being a librarian or a teacher, it's also pretty unavoidable that at some point some child is going to spoil you on a book. So you'll be sitting there and reading a book, or you're in the middle of a book, and you know, a kid will come to check it out, and you'll say, "Oh, that's a really good book. I'm reading it right now." And they'll say, "Oh, well, it was so sad when so-and-so died at the end." Like, I literally had that happen to me before. So I have to, you know, as a book professional, it's just something that I'm a little less sensitive to than I was maybe when I was younger, but it's also just something that maybe my feelings about books and just my general disposition is also part of what led me to being a book professional. So I don't know how intertwined those two things are, but long story short, spoilers don't bother me. I spoil myself a lot of the time, and I'm okay with that. That is a fine way for me to live my life, and I don't plan on stopping that anytime soon. So if you have any thoughts to share on this, if you also like to be spoiled, or if you just think you are disgusted with me because I'm, you know, why would I be such a terrible person to my own self by spoiling things, please share those thoughts with me in the comments. And as always, book nerds, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.